What's going on? Travis Stetzel here, TravisStetzel.com, trainaggressive.com, and I am here with my man Pete Osborne, the gluten-free warrior. And I've mentioned this guy before in the past, and if you've been following me for a long time now, you know I really like to promote paleo-like eating style because of the numerous benefits. But I'm going to have Pete here kind of go into more of the details about the benefits of gluten-free eating and cutting gluten totally out of your diet. I can talk all day about it, but until you really listen to the details that Pete's got to share, I mean, this guy is an expert in this stuff. He doesn't call himself the gluten-free warrior for anything, for nothing, I should say. So I'm going to turn it over to Pete, and he's just going to kind of go through the ins and outs of why it's important to go gluten-free, especially if you're someone wanting to, get leaner, stronger, improve your performance. So, Pete, what's up, brother?
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me. So, we're going to talk a little bit today about the whole grain myth. A lot of people were raised and born on breads, pastas, and cereals. We've been from birth, we've been told these are the most important foods in the diet. And unfortunately, it's just not true. If you look around, we've been being told those things for the last 30, 40 years. And if you look at the rates of cancer and heart disease and diabetes and osteoporosis and all the other chronic degenerative diseases, we can see them rise with the consumption of grain. So the more grain actually that we eat as a species, the more disease we see showing up with the species. So why is that a myth? Well, if you look at who wrote the Food Guide Pyramid, the Food Guide Pyramid was actually written by attorneys. It was not written by doctors or nutritionists. And so what we've got is we've got financial interest involved. The grain industry wants you to buy more grain. That's basically what it boils down to. So the myth has been perpetuated so that we could buy more of that product that's very cheap to grow, highly genetically hybridized or genetically modified so that it grows faster, grows more bushels per acre. And so there's a lot of money involved. And so the advice that's been given, which is eat a lot of it, is really more financially tied than it is based in science and nutrition. If we look at what happens with grain, in any culture where we've seen grain introduced as a staple food, we see disease shortly follow in that culture. And we can go back as far as the Egyptians, and we have evidence and proof that this occurs. Where grain is introduced, we see growth stunning, we see osteoporosis, bone changes, the jaw shortens, the jaw starts to change, we have dental changes, more cavities. So these are all very well documented when grain is introduced as a staple food. So these are things that you're going to want to understand and take with you. But why are we talking about gluten-free? Well, you're trying to train hard and you're working, you're putting in the work. It's not about putting in the work for you, probably, because you're already doing it. But what you're doing is you're sabotaging that work. That's like going to work and putting in a full 8-hour day and then having somebody come back behind you and ruin everything that you just did. That's what your wrong diet is doing to your training program, because what gluten can actually do is it can inflame your muscles. Studies have shown that gluten causes muscular inflammation, it can damage the cartilage, it can damage the tendons and the ligaments and the bones, and it can create chronic pains, chronic injuries, slower recovery times. And so all those things added up together equals less results for you, or equals injury that keeps you out of training. And so obviously you don't want that. The other thing that we know gluten does is it causes your gut to develop little microscopic holes. These little holes are what we would call that scientifically is intestinal permeability or leaky gut. And this leaky gut leads to more chemical reactions that are inflammatory. And these inflammatory reactions, again, they cause swelling and water retention. So if you're trying to get cut, if you're trying to get ripped, you're going to be retaining more water. That water retention is not going to look good, first of all, but what does it mean? It means that you're inflamed, and that inflammation is what is the underlying cause of keeping you damaged or slowing down your healing process. But the other component of leaky gut and with gluten is that it causes vitamin and mineral deficiencies. So let's say you're working out and you're trying to eat right and you're supplying good fuel for your body except for those grains, and those grains are causing you to become deficient in nutrients like magnesium or nutrients like vitamin B12. And what ends up happening is your energy levels drop. You can't perform as well. Your oxygen capacity is lowered because you've got vitamin B12 deficiency causes anemia. So you don't have to have this severe, I'm in bed all day anemia for it to start affecting your performance in the gym. So you really want to take it seriously. You want to look at that gluten in your diet. And if you haven't already gone paleo, which I highly recommend, over even just a gluten-free diet, the good place to start for you is going to be cut the grains out first. Then look to the dairy, then look to the legumes and the sugars and the other things that paleo diets restrict. But start with the gluten-free diet, because the gluten-free diet ultimately is kind of going to be your surefire way to see a great advantage. Most people going gluten-free who are gluten sensitive are going to see benefits within the first month. They're going to see a dramatic improvement, a dramatic change. When I went gluten-free 10 years ago, I wasn't fat. I was somewhat of a bodybuilder, and I lost 25 pounds that year in inflammatory water weight and visceral fat around my gut. And my body fat dropped from about 12% down to 8%. And I didn't train any differently. I was actually able to train a little bit harder after going gluten-free. So again, if you're working hard and you're not seeing the results, or you're not recovering as well as you should be or think you could be, then you want to look to the diet next, because your diet is most likely the thing that's sabotaging your results.
That's some great information. And something else I want to get into, Pete, is one of the main things, like feedback-wise, that I get from people is, well, I'm not having any sort of like gluten intolerances, or like, you know, I'm not feeling anything like that. Why don't you kind of go into that? Even people that aren't having, you know, symptoms.
So what are the symptoms? There's 190 different diseases linked to gluten sensitivity if you were actually gluten sensitive. And the way to actually tell is to do genetic testing. This is the way we do it in my clinic, is we test patients to determine whether or not they actually need to be on the diet. And it's as easy as a cheek swab. We can find out if you have the DNA, the genes specifically that will dictate that your body doesn't like gluten, and then when you eat it, it creates an inflammatory reaction. Think of it like a slow poison. Some people have an acute reaction, meaning when they eat it, they react very quickly right away. But the majority of people with gluten sensitivity have internal inflammation. It's like I was saying before, I didn't feel bad before I went gluten-free. But that inflammation was water weight retention. That inflammation was inflammation around my heart and around my intestine. And that's the thing that causes, over 30, 40, 50 years of life, that's what contributes to heart disease, to cancer, to diabetes. So you may feel like you're asymptomatic. In other words, you're not having any gross, dramatic symptoms immediately after the ingestion. But that's the way gluten works. Gluten is a slow toxin. It causes underlying inflammation. And just like when a person has high blood pressure, they don't really feel it until it's too late. And you don't want to start feeling gluten, because when you can start feeling the effects of it, chances are you've developed an autoimmune disease, and once you have that, it takes 2 to 3 years to put one of those things into remission and just to get you healthy again. So you may have what you think is health right now, but think of that next level. Health is a relative term. Where you're at today, what you consider to be healthy is healthy for what you know. And I thought the same thing. Cutting gluten out, my health went to a whole nother level. And so relative to what I thought was healthy, my performance increased, my muscle improved. All those different changes that were made were relative changes to what I thought I knew. So again, you don't have to be symptomatic. It's not an issue of whether or not you're having a ton of symptoms as to whether or not you're going to benefit by going on the diet.